But most disturbingly, in this House, the House that freed men from the scourge that is slavery and gave women suffrage, we have a member that not only supports this organization, Hamas, that slaughtered these Jews, but has actively called for the eradication of the Jews as a people by promoting the slogan, "From the river to the sea," on social media.
I can't believe I have to say this, but Palestinian people are not disposable. We are human beings, just like anyone else. My city, my grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve. 71% of Michigan Democrats support a ceasefire. So you can try to censure me, but you can't silence their voices. I urge my colleagues to join with the majority of Americans and support a ceasefire now to save as many lives as possible. President Biden must listen to and represent all of us, not just some of us. I urge the president to have the courage to call for a ceasefire and the end of killings.
And you still got paid? They paid you to not know any of this? Like, what did you do? As the lead person, you're just like, I didn't know, I don't know. Like, you got millions of dollars to not know anything about your own bank? You were awful at your job, obviously, right? But at the end, you benefited while the small business community in the country hurt. You know what that looks like when I go back to my community and they're like wondering why we can't claw back the fact that you benefited while everybody else suffered. I mean, do you care that you even would have collapsed the financial system in our country with your greed?
Mankind's activities have influenced the climate, and we can detect those effects. The next question is, are those effects large, and is there evidence of a crisis in the sense of the several examples that you have cited? The answer is no.
And you wouldn't say that the burning of fossil fuels has been a large part of the crisis that we do see?
I don't think we see a crisis, and therefore I don't think fossil
All right,
fuel...
fair enough. Fair enough.
The human cost in terms of loss of human life over the last century from climate-related events has gone dramatically down, and that's because of the broad economic growth that we've seen in our country.
Do you know anything about cities like Detroit, New York, Chicago, where working class people are literally suffering because we do nothing about climate? Nothing. We don't give them the resources we pull aside. Why? Because certain industry want to be denied that we even have climate risks and how that impacts people's retirement, how it impacts our economy. It's going to happen. And guess what? You're going to come right back here to want us to bail you out again. Literally. You're the reason that we got to increase costs on these folks.
Private equity firms aren't generally involved in the manufacturing.
I'm just telling you, this is overgeneral because it's only 11% of your business. You're saying right now that's not the reason that manufactured homes are rising costs. You're saying it's ESG.
I'm saying it's a contributor, and it is binding.
It's a contributor?
It is.
When did ESG come up in the manufactured homes industry? When?
ESG is a framework. It's the mandates.
When did it come about? When did they start talking about? 2019? 18?
We're facing these DOE.
When did they start talking about ESG in your industry?
And let's just get this record straight here. This is not something that's made up. The United Nations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israel's own largest human rights organization, B'Tselem, all agree that Israel is an apartheid state. To assert otherwise, Mr. Speaker, in the face of this just body of evidence is an attempt to deny the reality and to normalize violence of apartheid.
Lady from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm
4.5 minutes, sorry.
It's okay. I'm the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, Mr. Chair, and my perspective is needed here now more than ever. I will not be silenced, and I will not let you distort my words. Folks forget I'm from the city of Detroit, the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, where I learned to speak truth to power even if my voice shakes. Trying to bully or censor me won't work, because this movement for a ceasefire is much bigger than one person. It's growing every single day. There are millions of people across our country who oppose Netanyahu's extremism and are done watching our government support collective punishment and the use of white phosphorus bombs that melt flesh to the bone. They are done watching our government, Mr. Chair, supporting cutting off food, water, electricity, and medical care to millions of people with nowhere to go. Like me, Mr. Chair, they don't believe the answer to war crimes is more war crimes. The refusal of Congress and the administration to acknowledge Palestinian lives is chipping away at my soul. Over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed. Majority were children. But let me be clear. My criticism has always been of the Israeli government and Netanyahu's actions. It is important to separate people and governments, Mr. Chair. No government is beyond criticism. The idea that criticizing the government of Israel is anti-Semitic sets a very dangerous precedent, and it's being used to silence diverse voices speaking up for human rights across our nation. Do you realize what it's like, Mr. Chair, for the people outside the chamber right now, listening in agony to their own government dehumanizing them? To hear the President of the United States we helped elect dispute death tolls as we see video after video of dead children and parents under rubble. Mr. Chair, do you know what it's like to fear rising hate crimes, to know how Islamophobia and anti-Semitism makes us all less safe, and worry that your own child might suffer the horrors that 6-year-old Wadia did in Illinois? Speaking up to save lives, Mr. Chair, no matter faith, no matter ethnicity, should not be controversial in this chamber. The cries of the Palestinian and Israeli children sound no different to me. What I don't understand is why the cries of Palestinians sound different to you all. We cannot lose our shared humanity, Mr. Chair. I hear the voices of advocates in Israel, in Palestine, across America, and around the world for peace. I am inspired by the courageous survivors in Israel who have lost loved ones, yet are calling for a ceasefire and the end to violence. I am grateful to the people in the streets for the peace movement, with countless Jewish Americans across the country standing up and lovingly saying, "Not in our name." We will continue to call for a ceasefire, Mr. Chair, for the immediate delivery of critical humanitarian aid to Gaza, for the release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained, and for every American to come home. We will continue to work for a real lasting peace that upholds human rights and dignity of all people and centers in peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians, and censures no one, and ensures that no person, no child has to suffer or live in fear of violence. I urge the President to have the courage to call for a ceasefire and the end of killings. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate my colleague from North Carolina, because I think this is going to help answer the question that you refuse to answer, Mr. Becker. If you look at the screen, you look at the slide there, it's pretty clear. Just so we're clear, because I know you're blaming social media. You're actually somebody that's blaming. You're not looking at me, Mr. Becker. I'm right here. Yep. You're blaming social media for your mismanagement and so forth, which to me clearly looks like greed. Because you're not stupid. You're just being greedy because you wanted to get a payout. Just so we're clear for the record, were you aware of any material or non-public information such as the potential capital raise before January 6th trading plan change that allowed you to sell over $3 million in stock, in Silicon Valley Bank stock?
When the plan was set up, I was not aware.
On January 26th, you changed a corporate trading plan, allowing the future sale of your shares in the company, correct?
On that date,
January 26th.
I filed a 10b5-1 plan that was signed off on by our legal team.
Okay, so it's yes. So again, the question, were you aware of any material non-public information, such as the potential capital raise before January 6th trading plan change that allowed you to sell over $3 million in Silicon Valley Bank stock?
When that plan was set up, I was not aware of the plan to raise capital.
So, Mr. Becker, given the federal funds rate increased more than 3% points during 2022, why did your company unwind these swaps, exposing your firm to further rate increases? Because everybody wants to know the answer to the why.
Congresswoman, as mentioned earlier, the decision around our interest rate hedges was made or overseen by our Asset Liability Committee and executed by our Treasury team.
Given the interest rates continue to rise under your leadership, until the collapse, did you feel that terminating these swaps were safe and sound practice?
Congresswoman, as mentioned, I was not involved in those decisions.
Yep. Given your incentive compensation plan, Mr. Becker, I mean, the Financial Times, reported that the interest rate swap sales resulted in a gain of $500 million for Silicon Valley Bank in the first 2 quarters of 2022 alone. Given your incentive compensation plan and other forms of pay, did you benefit from terminating its hedges against interest rates?
Congresswoman, if I could clarify 2 points.
Did you get money for it? Did you benefit from that decision?
Congresswoman, can I clarify the point that you're making?
Sure.
So the hedges are, when hedges are changed, sold, the benefit, if there is a benefit, it's actually amortized over several years. That was not taken into income that period of time. And secondly, our compensation committee would actually review anything that they believed was an anomaly outside of our standard practices and back that out typically from incentive compensation.
But Mr. Becker, do you think selling the hedges to interest rate risk is ultimately good for your depositors, shareholders, and other financials in our own financial system in the country as a whole? Was it just good for you, or was it for the executives at Silicon Valley that benefit from the sales through your incentive-based compensation? Because according to this timeline, it looked like you set it up so you all benefit and walked away, while every other bank in our financial system was literally like at jeopardy.
Congresswoman, our compensation was set up for long-term incentives.
You knew. You knew. You knew a couple years. Even if we increase regulation, they sent you notices. They met with you guys. What do you want them to do? Come arrest you and so you can respond to the fact that they saw that you guys were making really, really terrible terrible decisions. I love that GAO calls it poor governance and mismanagement. You were awful at your job, obviously, right? But at the end, you benefited while the small business community in the country hurt. Thank you so much, Chairman. I'm really incredibly taken aback. I always look at the witnesses that come before us and try to figure out, what lens you're bringing or your lived experience or the people that you serve. And when I found out, and again, these numbers are pretty old, but in 2018, just look at the witnesses. 2018, ExxonMobil gave American Enterprise Institute $160,000, bringing the total to 4.65. No, keep shaking your head. I want to know why we're here. Because in Detroit, we had the hottest days. Look at the National Flood Insurance Program. I talk to our chairman all the time. First of all, it is a form of socialism, but okay. That doesn't exist, because those are the big mansions on the ocean, and those folks get bailed out. But my folks, literally their basements, everything get flooded. They're literally suffering every single day. This whole ESG, quote, unquote, whatever debate, it is fabricated political issue. We already know. Luckily there are folks within your industry who have actually spoken up and said, this is BS. That particularly the fossil fuel industry, in some cases, are trying to protect, their short-term profits at the expense of workers, retirees, and communities. Shake your head, but $4.65 million since 2008, this is since 1998, is a lot of freaking money, and that's only just the recent amount of money, and I don't even know what everybody else is taking. But, A.G. Ellison, one of the things that I'm, concerned about, and again, pensioners, families saving for retirement are concerned about the performance of companies over the decades. They really are. They sincerely are. They actually don't trust them. I got a lot of retirees that don't trust them, y'all. They're pretty big. So for them, transparency is a wonder. This is exactly what they need to be talking about. This is exactly what they need. They want to be able to access that information. They need to protect their investments. So A.G. Ellison, can you touch on the ways that ESG disclosures promote long-term value creation instead of risky or short-term profit-seeking initiatives and movements that they're supporting?
Congresswoman, I think they drive a conversation that is essential. I think they drive a dialogue. They allow questions to be asked and answered. I agree. Truly immaterial information, that's one thing. But how climate is impacting people in an urban environment like Detroit, where I grew up, it's everything. People die when it gets too hot for too long. But also the issue of governance is critical. People want to know, are we getting all points of view in this conversation so that we can assess the risk all the way on a 360 level. And certainly, in the area of social does matter to folks. It certainly is an important thing. It's not a mandate, but it is a critical set of considerations, which I think improve shareholder value. The risk adjustment is more accurate, I think.
It is the anti-ESG crusaders here are simply, for me, carrying the water of corporations that don't really want to disclose long-term risks that their businesses face. And it's true. I don't know how much data we need, how much more studies. I know my folks are really tired of the studies and constantly, because it reveals everything we're supposed to know, right? But we do nothing about it. We're saying not now, not really. And I don't think that there is any care of whether or not the heat or the climate challenges are really impacting human life or certain sectors of the business. And I know, A.G. Ellison, you're going to give me some examples of material risks related to workplace safety, racial equity, workers' freedom of association that ESG disclosures might reveal. We can continue talking about that. But for me, you lose credibility, like the Manhattan Institute for 2 decades, taking money from Exxon. You lose credibility when you're taking literally money from the people that don't think the challenges are actually here, that we actually have a climate crisis. You lose credibility. You got to come here and you got to understand this is real and it's happening, and saying it's not happening or how somehow it's impacting the private sector and stuff. Guess what? You're all going to end up right here asking us to bail you out. So do something now about it. Don't wait. Don't try to gaslight the American people that ESG is not important.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you so much, Chairman. This is, I think, our 3rd hearing on this. It's bizarre to me because, one of the things that I've been really appreciative of previous administrations and others been talking about, movement around, weatherization and, even manufactured homes doing the kind of upfront, and it does cost money up front, but it leads to reducing, reliance, high, utility bills, energy efficiency leads to actually lower bills for many of the families, and they can't afford it. So it's not all going, right out the window when we don't have some of those investments at the front end. So it's really bizarre for me, and we continue to hear this as, oh, the whole housing crisis is because of this. I'm taken aback because we all know it existed before even the ESG even was invented or created. And so, I know in my district, for instance, the tax foreclosure crisis was just unbelievable. We had one of the worst tax foreclosure crises in the country. These are families that actually own their homes, but they could not pay for their property taxes. ESG had nothing to do with it, nothing. Actually, probably if it did, maybe there would have been some sort of best practices or policies implemented. But they're also acting like ESG is like binding. Is ESG binding? Ms. Nagy?
It really depends on whether by law it is.
Yeah, they decide.
It's a standard, yeah.
Is it binding?
It depends on the legislation and possible litigation.
I know, but right now, ESG policies, is it binding? Is it forcing people to, is it binding?
It's not.
It's advisory, right? It's like you should look into this.
It's a factor that can be looked at because it may have correlation with risk magnitude, and it's consistent with fiduciary duty in the investment community.
Sure. How about you, ma'am?
Code's requirements are binding, yes, ma'am.
Oh, they're binding. They're requiring them to look at these things because what is because it's actually increasing their mortgage payments? Is it increasing the cost of home? I mean, I don't understand.
The 2021 Energy Code would increase the cost of a home. About, I think some of our members say about $31,000 in their area.
So one of the things that my colleagues talk about is manufactured homes, and it's about 11%, I think. Is it 11%, Mr. Byrd? Like 11% of single-family homes are manufactured housing, is that correct?
Yeah, from that to the mid-teens.
Yeah. So one of the things that they were trying to advance is energy efficient standards for manufactured homes, which many have claimed have made them unaffordable. But though the data and everyone shows that the cost to comply with energy standards, actually those improvements reduce maintenance, utility costs for manufacturing housing residents in the long term. Is that correct?
That's not correct.
Really, why is that?
well,
You tell me, because you're all acting like this environmental, this whole little policies around looking at the fact that we have a climate crisis is increasing the cost of manufactured homes, which we all know is because of private equity firms, because of investors. Ms. Nagy, you know I'm right. All this existed before that. And now that we're telling them, hey, you gotta be more responsible, that all of a sudden we're saying, no. You're the reason that we gotta increase costs on these folks. Understand this is the bizarre thing. I've never even heard of ESG until now. Like I'm really curious, because to me, my families, they've seen the rising cost of housing, not because of ESG. It's because of all the other issues I wish we would be more targeted around talking about. Because majority of the homes in my district are less than $100,000, but we can't get some of these banks to actually loan because it's not profitable. So somebody that wants to buy a $60,000, $70,000 home in Wayne County, Michigan, can't find somebody to lend it to them because it's not profitable. So what do they, literally everybody else is swallowing up these homes because, 60, 70 investor firms come together, they buy a bunch of them, they turn them into rental properties. Where literally I have a block and like 2 people own their homes, the rest of them are literally renters. And they're paying way more, much more, than what they would have paid if they had gotten a mortgage from some sort of banking industry. I say this, and I really don't want you all to say, I'm not disrespecting you all, but please don't make this about ESG. You're actually failing your members and your industry and literally your sector by focusing on ESG and not the root causes of why the cost of housing is going up in our country.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you so much. I am the only Palestinian American serving in Congress, and I have family members all throughout the West Bank and what many people call the illegally occupied territories. But we're here again, reaffirming Congress' support for apartheid, policing the words of women of color who dare to speak up about truths, about oppression, is just not what we should be doing here in Congress. This week, we're gonna hear consistently that people touting about this is bipartisan support here. Well, don't forget, this body, this Congress, supported the South African apartheid regime, and it was bipartisan as well. But you don't have to take it from me to understand the racism of an apartheid government. Let's take a moment just to hear Israeli government's own politician in their own words. Direct quotes, not mine. Current Prime Minister Netanyahu, on his policies towards Palestinians, quote, beat them up, not once, but repeatedly, beat them up until it's unbearable, and said that Israel must, quote, crush Palestinian hopes for a fully sovereign state. One of the former defense ministers said Palestinians are, quote, beasts, and they are not human. He's talking about people like my grandmother, Mr. Speaker. How about former Justice Minister who said they should go, as should the physical homes in which they raise the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. How about another former defense minister said, quote, those who are against us, there's nothing to be done. We need to pick and axe them and cut off their heads. Another quote, there is no such thing as Palestinian people.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
At its core. Mr. Speaker, Israel's own president, who's
The gentlelady's time has expired. Does the gentleman from New York reserve or yield?
I yield the gentlelady 30 seconds.
Israel's own president, Herzog, who's going to come before Congress tomorrow, has long advocated against interracial marriages. Did you all know that? Do you care? He said on a news segment, look it up, when he came to America, he said, quote, encountered something that I call an actual plague. I saw my friends' children married and coupled with non-Jewish partners. Israel is an apartheid state. The government is deeply problematic in the way that they are proceeding in the structure of oppression. This year, Mr. Speaker, just like I speak up against injustices here in America, this is about speaking up
The gentlelady's
against
time has expired.
violence.
Does the gentleman from New York
Congress must
yield
stop
or reserve?
funding apartheid.